to our very first lecture, which is Deconstructing the Great Goddess. And I've actually been teaching this classroom or in workshops or in retreats for a long time. And I'm actually going to share it with you all today in a way I've never taught it before. I've never taught it like this before. And I mean, I can get to tell you later why why it's different now than last time or what have you. I'm going to share the screen and wait, let's go here. Again, I am recording this, and unfortunately I can't see the chat at all right now because of the screen. But if somebody wants to on the questions just for a second, or if somebody really wants to ask something, just somebody get my attention because I'm not going to be able to really see the chat. Alicia, can you see this screen okay for where it says Great Goddess Deconstructed? Awesome, thank you. So essentially, heard a lot about okay, we've heard a lot about this idea of art that goes back 30,000 years. That's the Paleolithic age, right? We've heard about amazing, like artistic, like intentional, beautiful art inside cave walls. This particular fresco is found in southern France. You see a lot of this stuff in caves in southern France, and they are beautiful. The representation of this art is incredible. It's very two-dimensional, but you actually look at some of it and it looks like across the inside of the walls. I mean, like it really is really good representation. We hear about that a lot of times, and I think this is southern France right here. So all of this is Europe. And during the Paleolithic or the Ice Age, it goes back 2 million years, but the Upper Paleolithic, demonstrates a time when early humanity literally would go up and down and chase this was a big hunter's age, right? So they would chase the deer and the bullock and the saber-toothed tiger and whatever else, the bison that they were chasing up and down here. It was very cold and they just followed the herds. That's where their food source came from, right? Pretty soon we're going to talk Neolithic, which is the next era. We'll be talking more and more about this crystallizing this area. But for now, about right here. And there have been over 200 figurines found that are dated back to the Paleolithic. So you see lots of different types of animals, and we can talk about this. But it's even more fascinating about these animals is the other have been found along this somewhere in the Paleolithic. I don't know if anybody can tell what this is. Alexander Marshak did this amazing research on early culture, and this is actually an early calendar. So it's lunar notation. Cool, huh? So we start to see in the Paleolithic that one of the hallmarks of the Paleolithic is patterns. They're looking at patterns. Sky, right? So sun, moon, stars, that sort of thing. Animals migrating, birds, all of that. The cycles, patterns of nature, both in the heavens and on the earth. That's what they're learning, creating in terms of their stories, in terms of how they're living. Okay, why is that? Wait, no, okay, hold on. There we go. So now we get into these figurines. This one at Hulsfell is found in Germany, 40,000 years old. It's a fascinating figure, and we think it's female. Why? Yes, speaking language. Okay. Because obviously the breasts, it looks like some kind of figure. And so often these figures have been called female figurines. And for the most part, these 200 female figurines, or this swath of Europe, they do think are female. And here's going into Germany and just a little bit closer up. I don't know why this is where, oops, sorry. Pulling back out a little bit, it's kind of like that swath I showed you. Here's the cluster of where so many of these different figurines have been found across this way. And I'm just talking about this time period now, from the Paleolithic, from about 13,000 BC to 40,000 BC. That's a long, long time, right? A lot of space, a lot of cultural difference. There's got to be. But what happens is anthropologists and lay people alike try to come up with a connect the dots between these figurines. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We will be discussing that. This is the next one, the goddess of Willendorf. She's actually famous of all of these. And I actually have a representation of her here. So she literally is like 4 inches long. Her feet are unfinished. Her face looks like what woman, right? And so there's fascinating theories about this figurine as well as many figurines. The goddess of Willendorf. Willendorf is a place in Austria, 35,000 years. So we can look at this figure and we can think, oh, she's got this. We know already from the cave paintings that artists of this time were intentional and they were good, right? All of these figurines are three-dimensional and they're made on stone, rock, bone, tusk. Like it's every kind of medium you can imagine. That's what these figurines are made of. So why is there no face? And then why is there this big bulbous breasts and this all of this wonderful size, right? That of course we've completely erased nowadays. So some theorists have said, well, it takes 20% of body fat for a woman to ovulate. That's very much a theory about what? Fertility, right? Oh, got to make the babies, got to have the babies, right? So that's kind of a narrow glance. But the truth is, when so many of these figurines were found, you guys, they were these buttoned up white male anthropologists who were from the Victorian era who had really, really silly theories about what these goddesses were all about, right? So some said they were pornographic images. They were there to delight the husbands, making images of their wives. Like there were all sorts of these, or they were only mother goddesses. So there's Austria. So again, we're still talking about this little pastoral highway, right? This is my favorite, and this is the one I really got caught up on. It's still kind of really, it tends to lean in towards itself in this idea of a woman's reproductive system or woman's anatomy. Some people say that this figure, this is the goddess of Lassalle, also found in France, y'all. It's still three-dimensional, but she's carved into a cave wall. She's pointing to her pelvis. Some say she's pregnant. I didn't see the pregnancy thing, but she is pointing to her pelvis. And what is really cool is you see this connection between her pelvis, right? As in AKA menstrual cycle. And there are 13 lines on this little bison horn right here, right? 13 lines. Joseph Campbell, who's a mythographer, right? He helped George Lucas write Star Wars. We can get into that another time if you want. Said that there's 13 moons in an agricultural cycle. So remember, the Paleolithic people are looking at patterns and they're noticing 13 moons for the sun to come back to where it was at that moment before, and for the herds to have gone back and forth, or whatever, however they're configuring it. It's also, there's 13 nights between menstruation and ovulation, right? So 13 becomes a very magical number that's associated with this idea of, does a woman's body represent the center of the cosmos? Does the mystery of all the celestial bodies somehow connect to a woman's body? When you start to get into childbirth and the need, I don't know how familiar you all are with childbirth, but during childbirth, it's a pretty bloody business. There's afterbirth could make for a very, very difficult and a very dangerous moment in time when the family of the mother, the female, and the baby would be very much vulnerable to attacks from animals, not other people, animals, right? we're still in that mode where if they're following herds around. Anyway, these are just different theory. Be curious to hear what you all think in a few minutes. And this is just another representation. Again, this is also southern France. Goddess of Lesbieux. And then also this is, I always pull this one out because again, even though we saw Willendorf, she had, this face that was kind of, circular. We also see here that they were all very astute at the same time period about actually having facial features if they wanted to. So here's where these figurines have been found all over Europe. Pretty cool, huh? So let's talk about then, like I said, over 200 different goddesses or figurines. Some people, though, guess, are they all female? This is what is in modern Ukraine, so this would be more of Eastern Europe, right? 13,000 BC. This meander is a shape that you do see it goes back to the Paleolithic. It could be an early symbol of water, but is this a female? We don't know. This might be a bird goddess or a bird person, for all we know. And we're going to talk more about bird anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figures in the next couple of days when we get probably by Wednesday. This is one of the few figures that was of a male. This is called the Lion Man, and actually they found it in like 100 pieces and all splintered all over the place in this one little area, and they put it back together. But that's why it looks kind of chiseled the way it does, I think. Yes, there are different ways of looking at these ideas of male representation. Male representation is often seen, just like some of the female ones, but often seen as associated with animals and with cave drawings. And we know then oftentimes then that men must have participated as hunters. But we still see different representations of symbology with female anatomy and animals. So for instance, this is a big fresco inside a cave wall in southern France that shows women's vulvas nestled into different cat imagery. There's something a little bit closer, more of a wide angle. But essentially, what could that be saying, right? It could be saying, what do we see when we observe cats? We observe fierceness, protection, like strength, right? Every animal, every creature, everything in existence at this time would have had great meaning, great powers, maybe spiritual, religious significance. Think about what it must have been like to have to kill an animal in order for you to survive. That is a conundrum of the human psyche. So hence they think that it's possible that early hunting tribes, as well as this female figurine, meant there was a dual concept of original religion. Meaning if a female's body, this is just a theory, a female's body is associated with the cosmos, with early calendars, right? The menstrual cycle every 29 days and the moon, right? Then also the male and probably female, we don't know, or queer, no binary that we can associate with here, right? We don't know. Could have also in these ideas of the hunter, which is everyday survival, versus the big cycles of life, the eternal, come together to form the first religion. And the rituals around killing an animal might have been some of the early rituals of that religion. You can still study different indigenous groups today, like look at the Pacific Northwest indigenous groups who practice, when they catch a whale and they use all the parts of this whale, the first thing they do is a priestess comes out and slits its throat to release its spirit and to honor the spirit. So how are we honoring the dead? That becomes a question that we are going to be asking and answering for a long time in this class, in our coursework. Okay, so the theories. The theories are fascinating. As I mentioned earlier, These buttoned up Victorian white male anthropologist dudes, anthropology at that time was also in its infancy. There, we're talking about well-educated men in upper classes, like who are thinking they know better than everybody else. And they are trying to like get their hands on all of these things around the world and trying to answer every question or whatever. But the thing is that I find so fascinating is that, and I want you to remember this, all of the theories that come up, basically the biggest thing we can get out of studying these figurines is it seems like the only way, I wrote this down, to really look at these figurines, it only reflects the culture who's studying it. Let me explain. So again, the buttoned up Victorian anthropologist male who's looking at this thinks it's pornography or thinks it's fertility goddess or thinks it's has to do with, they call it a Venus. They call all of these female figurines Venuses. And that really gets my goat. And I'm sure you can already figure out why. But the anthropologists who say this were probably Christian or probably, of a different faith. And the only kind of goddesses or female figurines they would have associated with these figurines would have been classical myth, which is Greco-Roman myth. And Venus is the name of a Roman goddess of sexuality and beauty, I guess. Venus is also, the Roman version of Aphrodite. We'll talk about her more later. But essentially then, so all of these figurines are called Venus. The Venus of Willendorf, the Venus of Lesbube, the Venus of Hofel, and so that is very universalizing. I'll tell you about why that's a problem in a minute. So just so you know, this is a kind of a prelude, on any quiz or paper you write, please be careful how you use the word fertility. I hate the word fertility. Fertility is very limiting. And what it does is it takes away and minimalizes the impact of the culture at that time. If this is an early religion, saying fertility just takes away every other possibility. Maybe there was leadership. Maybe it was like, there were just so many different possibilities. And fertility becomes something that sets it off in a corner and marginalizes it, basically. Pornography, we talked about that already. Sexuality, we talked about that. That kind of ties into fertility a little bit. Motherhood. One of my favorite current writers on the witch hunts that we're going to talk about, his name is Ronald Hutton. Yeah, Ronald Hutton. And and I've done a lot of reading of him outside of that, and we're going to obviously read on him later. And he talks about how the concept of the mother goddess around these figurines is a modern concept. Wah! Right? So there was a mother goddess before there was a father god. That is also something that only minimalizes these female figures, right? That alignment with nature. This is my biggest argument, although we have to be careful about universalizing because universalizing is a very modern concept. And what I mean by careful, one of the things about universalizing is that it means that we are trying to make all of these figurines kind of come under one umbrella. They all mean the same thing. They're all like each place where these people lived across Europe, aren't they due their own cultural moment? So that's the question about universalizing. I do think there's an alignment with nature because I think that is it shows there's a lot of evidence because of that's what they were working with. They were working with all of these patterns. And I'm going to come back to that. Ancestor worship. These figurines could have just been a recreation of like, oh, this was my great Aunt Sue. I loved her so much, right? But the one I love best of all, art, religion, okay, is self-representation. In the article that was posted last week, and I hope you read it, it's about different representation of gender. But it's also about, if you look down, there was no mirrors back then. If you look down on yourself as a woman artist or a woman with breasts and a belly, you're not going to be able to see your head or face. You're going to be able to see the breasts and probably not your feet. So looking down at yourself as these might have been pieces of art that were self-representation, like a self-portrait. And I love that answer kind of best of all. But that also means that there was a need, a desire to do that. And that just opens a whole new host of questions. We talked a little bit about how universality is a modern concept, that belief that we somehow want to connect everything together. Part of what happens when you study Jungian psychology and the archetypes, it's very ahistorical, and it's very, very intriguing about, it helps us be like, oh, we're all in this together. Oh, humanity's all the same. Joseph Campbell, also hero with 1,000 faces. We love these ideas. We love the ideas of that, but that doesn't necessarily serve the culture, right? The other thing I already had addressed a little bit is the Venus used to describe all the female figurines. It's a misnomer because, one, the Greco-Roman world didn't exist then, and then theories of the mother goddess. There's different people who get to say, I'm the authority here on what these figurines are. So like then if we look today at these figurines, there's been a lot of feminist scholarship, a lot of feminist theory about what these figurines mean. Hold on one second, what's the next page? Yeah, so who gets to be the authority? I believe in a yes and philosophy. Yes and philosophy means, okay, let's take a little bit of this theory and take a little bit of that theory. Maybe these were early representations of a god, of a deity, of like the one and only. Like maybe there was a one and only kind of God back then, a monotheistic view, the way we look at God God, the Abrahamic God today. But we need to work on removing the modern lens, right? And try to understand each. But who gets to say what? So I'm going to give you an example. You've got these archaeologists and these anthropologists who have been their whole lives. They've excavated, they've been there, they've done the work, boots on the ground, they've been there and they're the ones doing all the work. So in the 1970s and 80s, there were all these eco-feminists, and this is kind of when I came of age and was first turned on to these ideas of goddesses, that there's a whole new goddess movement that has come out of the study of these figurines. I can talk more later about all of the back and forth. But for instance, what if you've got someone who is non-binary and considers themselves like loves these figurines, but also has a homophobic view of calling them a mother goddess because they themselves don't subscribe to this as constricting view of women only being born to be mothers. So my point is then that a current feminist reflection could be, wow, I'm a post-structuralist. I don't want to look at this for the sake of gender. But I do want to look at it in terms of like, was there female leadership back then? Was there a different kind of society where women were in the center of all of the power? So there's a woman named Rianne Eisler, and she's in my bibliography. You can check her out. And she wrote this book, The Chalice and the Blade, and she talks about partnership societies versus hierarchical societies. So a partnership society might have existed, right? This doesn't have a lot to do with this idea of a mother goddess, but it has other things to do with looking at gender and gender constructs. This is where it really gets interesting, right? So Rianne Eisler is a social scientist, right? She's a doctor, right? But she's not an archaeologist. Does she get to have a say in what these figurines might have represented? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I do. I have an opinion, but I don't know the answer. So the other thing is that we're going to have to be careful of is watch out for pitfalls of cultural appropriation. We kind of already know what that buzz term is all about, right? So you can't say, for instance, I'm going to apply my Greco-Roman hat of my love of Greek mythology, and I'm going to put it on top of this ancient culture that went back 40,000 years, right? So we have to be careful about how we do that. And I've done that for a bit. I've thought, oh, wow, what if we could take all the gods of Mesopotamia, They had these really cool rituals. Let's see if they fit into Minoan Crete in Greece that we're going to study. No, I'm starting to see that we have to look at individual cultures individually. The other thing is I don't know if you've noticed, I've avoided essentialism. Essentialism is an important term which recognizes, like, again, women aren't just their breasts, right? Essentialism is when, or men aren't just their, they're not just their testes, right? So it's this idea of we can't just lock in a gender for its sexual attributes. Okay, important to remember that. There's one thing I want to show you. It's brand new. I'm always looking for brand new finds and discoveries. It's important to stay on top of it when we're looking at this stuff. There's the goddess of Willendorf. And they just figured out, this guy, Dr. Weber, figured out that Willendorf was actually made in what is now Italy, right? But they found her in Austria. And they were able to look at all the little grains inside the stones. I don't know if you study geology, you probably understand that part better than I do. But that kind of means that, look, this little figurine traveled all those miles. So maybe there was a lot of interplay between these cultures at different times that were sharing the same stories about female representation. Hard to say. And I just want to show you real quick, because when we go into, we're going to be talking about the Neolithic on Wednesday, coming right up, right? And even though this is not exactly, all the qualifications or whatever, it's important to kind of see Paleolithic was a period we were talking about all the way up until about 10,000, 9,000 BC. And then after that, we have a whole different set of, whole different kind of animal to work with. So we're domesticating grains, animals are domesticating us, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to stop the share there.